Welcome everyone to the TIS U10 Subject Selection webinar of 2020. My name is Annalisa and I'm from Swinburne University of Technology. However, for the purposes of this webinar, I will be representing TIS. Before we do kick off, I'd first like to do an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. I pay our respects to the elders past and present and emerging and any Indigenous people here today. So just for a few housekeeping rules I'll start off on. Please feel free to use the functions in Zoom. I'm sure many of you have played around in Zoom since working from home or studying from home. There is a Q&A box there, so if you want to ask us any questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to utilise that and we'll either use that to answer you live or maybe we will send you a text response. We also have the raise of hand button there as well if you want to let us know you're here or have something to say. So before we get started, we want to discuss what is TIS, because many of you may not have heard of TIS exactly, and it's essentially standing for Tertiary Information Services. We are a collective of universities, TAFE, institutes and independent tertiary colleges that hope to inform students across Victoria to help them prepare for future careers. And today with me, I do have Jackie from Monash University. But again, for today's purposes, she will be representing TIS. And we also have Phil Newman from Wantirna Secondary College. Phil will be speaking a little bit later in the presentation, and he's just going to give us a nice insight from a high school perspective. So there are many options after year 12. You can perhaps go into full-time work, take a gap year, maybe you want to take up an apprenticeship or a traineeship, or maybe you're thinking about going into further studies such as a diploma or a bachelor degree level. But today we're going to focus on what you need to think about over the next coming months to make sure you select the correct subjects to ensure you'll be able to progress into your chosen course at the end of year 12. And I might hand over to Jackie.
All right, so we're going to have a look at the types of senior school study options that are available to students first, so that obviously leads through into the subject selection area. So firstly, we're going to have a look at the Victorian Certificate of Education, or VCE, which is the most popular option for students to choose through years 11 and 12. So students can study either 5 or 6 subjects across the 2 years. There's over 90 VCE subject options and 20 VCE vet course options as well. So students who study the VCE will graduate with an ATAR score, which is accumulation of their individual subject study scores, which they can use to apply for tertiary education courses. So the VCE graduates are considered more academically prepared to study in higher education courses, such as degrees at universities or independent colleges, but can also apply for vocational education courses such as TAFE, apprenticeships, or go straight into the workforce. We then have VCAL. So VCAL stands for the Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning. These students will learn practical work-related skills and literacy and numeracy skills, which are important for both life and work. It's predominantly hands-on learning that provides pathways to many careers and further education. Students can complete a vet certificate or a school-based apprenticeship or traineeship whilst completing VCAL as well. VCAL graduates will receive a certificate and a statement of results and are eligible to apply for vocational education courses such as certificates and diplomas, and can then use these qualifications to apply for higher education courses once they've completed those first courses. And this is what we call a pathway. So going through a TAFE, for example, and then using that TAFE qualification to further study in higher education or at university or independent colleges. We then have IB, which is stands for the International Baccalaureate. And this is not offered at all schools, but there are some select schools around Victoria that do offer this internationally focused program, and is run across the world. So students that study IB will be required to complete 6 subject areas in literature, science, maths, humanities and foreign modern language as an elective subject from these study areas. This prepares students for higher education courses, particularly if you're looking to study overseas. Just a note that when studying IB, results do come out at a little bit of a different time to students studying VCE or VCAL, and generally in the first few days of January these results come out. But obviously this year we're not 100% sure what date that will be at this point. So if you are looking to study that, obviously it might change going through when you do get there. We also have VET. So VET studies are vocational and education training, and this is usually part of your either VCE or VCAL program. So looking at studying those as a part of your either VCE or VCAL studies. So I'm going to hand back over to Anna to talk about what you can study.
Okay, thank you. So before I kick off, let's start by looking at a few different reasons you might choose to pursue tertiary study. I'm just going to play a quick video for you.
And I'm just going to turn my video off so this hopefully comes through a little bit clearer.
Me too.
Quite simply, getting qualified after you finish school increases your chances of getting a job. Census data shows that the workforce participation rate for people with a certificate, diploma or degree is 80 to 90%, whereas for people who have not completed any tertiary study, it is only 61%. Statistics also show that employers prefer tertiary graduates. In 2005, less than half the Australian workforce had a tertiary qualification. Fast forward to 2015, and 63% of the Australian workforce have a tertiary qualification. If we keep going at this rate, by 2025, 77%, more than 3/4 of the Australian workforce, will have completed some kind of tertiary study. So you could say that tertiary study is becoming more and more essential to getting a job and building a career. And then there is the money. Tertiary graduates are likely to make more money than people with only a high school certificate. The median weekly income for someone who has no tertiary study is $784 per week. For those with one tertiary qualification, they average $1,100 per week. For those with 2 or more tertiary qualifications, they average $1,342 per week. So there are serious benefits in pursuing tertiary study after you finish school. And it's not just about the money and getting a job, as we'll explain next. Quite simply,
Okay, so some great news is that we are all living longer, but living longer also means we're going to be spending a much longer time in the workforce as well. But does that mean you have to make a decision in the next coming months that's going to determine the rest of your life? And that's absolutely not. We're already seeing an increasing number of career changings during a lifetime. So it's not just talking about changing between jobs, but also changing completely different types of work. So perhaps changing industries. The Foundation of Young Australia suggests current high school students, so many of you who've joined us today, will have up to 17 different jobs across 5 different careers in their lifetime. So this is going to be very different to what perhaps your grandparents experienced, where they may have gained a qualification and worked into an industry, and they worked in there for several years, or maybe they worked there until retirement. So you guys are expected to move quite a lot throughout jobs and careers. However, if we're introducing this concept of lifelong learning, it's really important that you have that positive approach over a lifetime. And one way to support this is by developing a range of soft skills, or you may call them as transferable skills. These things are including planning, teamwork, written and spoken communication skills, critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and even emotional intelligence. So whether you're going to walk into a certificate, a diploma, or a bachelor course, these types of skills are going to be learned through tertiary education, and they're going to be viable in all stages of your life, especially when we're talking about your career trajectory. The Foundation of Youth Australia also reports the best way to develop these skills and to practice these skills is done whilst gaining that tertiary qualification. And other trends suggest that these transferable skills are also vital to succeed in future workplaces. So many jobs in the future don't actually exist today. So maybe you're going to walk into a tertiary qualification in a couple of years, and all the skills and technical skills, soft skills you obtain, they're going to be utilised at a much later time in your life. And it's also important to keep an open mind that when you finish high school and you go into tertiary education, you're most likely going to return to tertiary education at a later time of your life. You might return as a postgraduate student, but you also might return as a TAFE student, for example, and completely change the industry you originally started in. So I might hand over to Jackie to talk about what you can study.
Thanks, Anna. So obviously, again, just bringing back to the fact that this is obviously focusing on Year 10 subject selection. So just looking at what you can then move through to when you do decide to go into tertiary education, just so that you're prepared as to what courses are available so that you can choose the right subjects to go into. So there's many different options, and we're going to have a look at the diplomas, degrees and independent tertiary colleges as well. So first off, we have certificates, diplomas and advanced diplomas. These qualifications are what I referred to earlier as vocational education, and are usually taught at TAFEs, independent tertiary colleges, and also at dual sector universities as well. So TAFE, just for your information, stands for Technical and Further Education. And these courses can be completed anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, although apprenticeships can also be 3 to 4 years long. The ATAR scores are not generally required for these types of courses, meaning that both VCE and VCAL students can apply for these courses, as well as students studying IB if they wish to as well. Diplomas and advanced diplomas can often provide pathways or credits into bachelor degrees at universities as well. So it's really important to make sure that you do your research and see what courses might be available as pathways into some degrees. Some institutions may offer specific pathway programs or offer credit for particular courses. So this is a really good time to make sure that you're having a look at what courses are out there for you, and if you're looking at those as potential pathway options. Vocational education can be really great hands-on learning, and students will learn practical skills to be work ready. The learning environment is usually quite similar to high school, where you would spend most of your time moving around with the same classmates. Students will generally spend around 20 to 25 hours a week at a TAFE, and students applying for these courses can often apply directly, but some institutions may require an application through VTAC. So again, make sure that you're doing your research there. Moving through to bachelor degrees and undergraduate degrees. So those two terms are used interchangeably. These can take anywhere between 3 and 5 years, and potentially longer if you're studying a double degree, for example. These are usually a combination of theory and practical learning, and depending on the course, may involve labs or other practical elements, and is a combination between individual work and team learning as well. So it's much more independent focused style of learning than say, for example, TAFEs or high school, where you're often attending lectures, tutorials and workshops, and you may not be with the same group for each of your classes as well. So most bachelor degrees are taught at universities, but independent tertiary colleges, some TAFEs also offer specialised degrees, as well as those dual sector universities as well. Students at university generally have less contact hours, but are expected to do exam revision and assignments and additional readings outside of class. So you may be looking at sort of 12 to 16 hours a week of contact, although it depends on the course that you are studying. So some courses will have higher contact hours as well. VCE and IB students are eligible to apply for these courses through VTAC. And as we mentioned before, if you have done a higher education qualification such as certificates and diplomas, you can then use those as a pathway through into higher education. We then have independent tertiary colleges, which are usually a specialised institution, and this is where you'll be able to complete a range of different courses, such as certificates right through to degrees. And as I said, it's usually specialised areas such as music or the creative arts, photography, for example, and maybe similar to, in many ways, depending on what you're studying, to either TAFE or uni. So it's a real combination, but they are those independent colleges. And now I'm going to hand back to Anna to talk about how you can get there.
Thanks, Jackie. So one of the greatest things about tertiary education is that there are so many options available to you now. You can finally train in or study something that you're really passionate about. So please do take the time to divulge on what subjects really interest you, what kind of topics interest you as well. So if you do have a passion or a special interest in something, there is of course available for you. You may already have some kind of idea of what you would like to do next year. So now we're just going to help you understand what you need to do to get there. So with most courses, including certificates, diplomas and degrees, you will have to have subject prerequisites and or selection requirements that must be met in order to receive an offer into the course. These are generally listed on the VTAC website and also the individual institution websites, as well as a course guide. Given that the situation of COVID-19, you may not have a hard copy of the course guide, but please do visit the institute's website if you'd like to download one. You must have the minimum prerequisite subject study score for all the subject prerequisites listed for the course that you'd like to be considered for. So basically I'm going to break it down into two segments. You have the raw study score and then you have the scaled score. So when a university is asking you to obtain a particular study score, they are going to be referring to the raw score. The scaled score is there to help calculate the ATAR. And when we're talking about those additional requirements, this must be completed in order to apply for the course you'd like to go into. So some courses might require a folio if you're going into something perhaps a little bit more creative. Maybe you'll have to go for an audition, sit an interview, an extra test, or maybe just simply hand in another piece of documentation. Again, this is all noted in the VTAC website and also the Institute's homepage. And just be mindful that if you are interested in a particular course, but you're looking at multiple areas, maybe you're looking at 3 universities, a few TAFEs or ITCs, just keep in mind that they do have different requirements depending on the institution. So for parents who have joined us today, it's really important to understand if your year 12 or if your year 10 student, is going to be talking about those year 11 and year 12 subjects. It's really important for you to be involved in those conversations, just so you can help them make the best subject choices for their future. And one way of doing this is to just open that conversation and ask them broad questions, such as where do they really see themselves after high school? Is it more of a university setting? Perhaps they want to be in an apprenticeship, go into a TAFE, or head into full-time work. As soon as you have an idea of the area they're more drawn into, that's when we can help you decide the types of study they'll choose, such as IB, VCE, or VCAL, for example. For those students who are considering studying at a university or an independent college, picking the right prerequisite VCE subject is really important because it'll essentially ensure you that you're eligible for the course you want to study. All higher education courses require the senior VCE English or EAL. And some courses also require additional prerequisite subjects. So please make sure you do your individual research into what the student needs in order to be eligible for the course they'd like to get into. However, we also like to tell students that it's really important to choose the subjects that you are interested in and passionate about, because those subjects are the best ways to ensure your success, not only in high school, but for the future. Please try and refrain from picking subjects because you think they might be scaled up. Really important to choose the subject that you enjoy. And like Jackie mentioned before, we did speak about pathways, and there's a few reasons why students should think about pathway options, and they're really good reasons as well. So for an example, a student may not have completed the prerequisite subjects in order to get into the course they potentially like to get into higher education. So that's where the conversation may happen with a career practitioner, talking about alternative courses or courses that are similar in the field that didn't require the prerequisite. It may also have a conversation about starting at a certificate or a diploma level. However, there's also going to be students who are studying the correct subjects in year 11 and 12, but perhaps they didn't reach that study score, or maybe they just fell a little bit short with the ATAR score. Again, this is where pathways kick in, and we can then talk about alternative ways to get into your dream course. So no matter how you perform or the subjects you choose, essentially, there's always a pathway option to get into your dream course. And now I might pass back on to Jackie to talk about what support is available.
Thanks, Anna. So I guess I'm just going to talk about what supports are available for students. And this is obviously, again, bringing back to the fact that we are talking about Year 10 subject selection, the different areas that you can find all of the information that you'll need to gain, a broad perspective of what your transition from high school through to further study will be like. And there's what we call the 3 Ps of support. So people, places, and publications. So with regards to people, this is a really great time to make use of your careers teachers, your subject teachers, your family and friends. Have a talk to them about, the areas that you're interested in and what you might want to pursue when you move into further study or a career. Have a talk to institution representatives like myself and Anna at individual open days or virtual expos, any webinars that might be happening, and also talk to people working or studying in the industry as well. So if you have a bit of an interest in a particular area, maybe seek out somebody who has a job in that field so you can find out a little bit more about what that career might have on offer for you. We then have places, so things like work experience, if you might be doing that throughout Year 10, industry experience days, if they're available, any campus visits. Obviously at the moment things are a bit different, but anything that might be available virtually or perhaps later in the year or throughout your VCE or senior years of study, it's definitely worth going to see what the places you'd like to study at, what they're like to be at. So things like open days. And you might also want to consider any extension programs, so where you're able to study a university level subject within your Year 12 program. So that's something to think about when you get through to Year 11 as well. And then there's publications. So this is a really great resource, particularly for finding your prerequisites. So course guides, so institution course guides, whether it be universities, TAFEs, or there's independent tertiary colleges. VTAC is a really great resource. At the moment, the VTAC website has all of the mid-year entry things on it, but if you check back come August, all of the February entry courses will be up, and you can have a look at things like any of the adjustment factors, all of the prerequisite subjects, and all of the courses that are available through there. And any online resources such as some of the events I've talked about, institution events, virtual events, webinars, any institution websites that you can use for resources, VTAC, all of those kinds of things. So make use of all of those areas across all the digital platforms. That pretty much brings us to an end of the presentation. So I'm going to stop screen sharing there, and I'll hand back to Anna to introduce Phil.
Thanks, Jackie. So I'd now like to welcome Phil Newman from Wantirna College to give you some further information about what you might like to consider from a high school perspective when making your year's subject selections for Year 11 and 12. Hello, Phil, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Awesome.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah. So in thinking about the choices for going on into Year 11 and 12, one of the things to think about is the style of learning that you prefer. So a VCAL program does suit people who prefer a more applied learning environment. So if you enjoy or prefer that sort of learning environment and don't particularly enjoy academic learning and perhaps don't see university as a likely destination after high school, But also if you'd like to integrate your work placement with a VET program. So that's what VCAL offers that sets it apart from VCE. If you still can't decide, then I think it's a really good idea to be talking to your school and also finding out more about what your school's VCAL program is like and how it works. But if you are comfortable with academic learning and you do see that university is definitely a destination that you want to be looking at, you should be considering VCE and IB if it's what your school offers. Definitely be talking to your school if you are an IB school to get help on the difference between those two choices. And I'd like to emphasise also, particularly for VCE, it's really important from my experience as a year 10 course counsellor that you choose subjects that you enjoy, that you've had success in, and that you would like to pursue further. And definitely do your homework. Make sure that you find out more about what those subjects are. Be careful about choosing something that's a prerequisite simply because you're told that you need to do it, because it usually needs to be something you're going to enjoy as well. So there's no real point in choosing a prerequisite if you're going to hate it. So again, work with your school in making those choices.
Awesome, thank you, Phil. And I just would like to put a little disclosure here. I did mention Phil Newman is from Wantirna College, so this information is quite general. So if you are a Year 10 student, please talk to your school about your specific options. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, I think we had another question, Jackie.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions that Anna and I are going to just ask just to start a bit of a conversation here. Anna, if you want to head off that one to start.
So Phil covered the VCAL, VC, IB. So the second question would be, what should students think about when considering which maths is the right level for them to study?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's always one that students can spend a lot of time thinking about, and really the best general advice about that I can think of is that you need to choose a maths that's appropriate to your level, and the best way to do that is to be talking with your teacher. So you may already have some ideas about that, but it's really important that you have those conversations with your maths teacher. You may also want to get advice from your careers advisor or people in your that may be your level coordinator, depending on how your school helps you with that decision. Some students discontinue maths because they feel like they may not need it. So you may perhaps regret that decision. So it's important to consider aiming for the highest maths that you feel like that you can have as part of your VCE program. It can be possible to take up maths later on beyond high school, but the best time to be thinking about this is particularly going into year 11 and 12. And VCAL students generally will have a numeracy component to their course. So you may not need to make that decision, but again, check with your school because some VCAL programs do offer an option to have a maths choice.
Awesome, thank you, Phil.
All right, so the next question we have for you, Phil, is so while year 12 might feel like it's a fairly long time away, should year 10 students consider what options might be available to them as pathways now?
Yep, definitely. So if you have a dream course now, that's terrific, and we want that. We know that not everyone does have that, but if you do, none of us know what the future holds. So you may not necessarily achieve the ATAR that you need. Perhaps you may not be able to meet a subject prerequisite. It may not come into your planning in going through VCE. You may feel like you cannot access that prerequisite, and you might also change your mind. So we know that TAFEs and universities have got many alternatives, but you should aim to find the best one for you. So you can start that planning in year 10, and that can look very different. Each of us are different and have a whole unique different set of options in front of us that we can make as part of our planning. So your school might even be doing some pathways planning as part of your course and subject selection. So again, check with them and they'll be able to help you further.
Thank you. So choosing your subjects now sometimes can feel very final or locked in for senior years. What options are there if students decide they want to change subjects or need after deciding on their desired course?
So, yeah, in your senior years, we'd say no choice is ever final. So there may be some things that you finish up doing your VCE that perhaps you'll look back on and say, well, I wish I hadn't done that, or maybe I could have made a different choice. It's always best to plan for what you prefer to do, but we know that things can change. So in year 11, you could potentially change a subject, so it's possible to do. And with a bit of careful planning and extra work, sometimes students might even change a subject beginning in year 12. Again, you need to really work with your school on that and whether that's really the best option for you. The IB program, as I said before, is different, and that's something that you would need to talk to your school about. So subject changes, they're not usually relevant to VCAL students, although they will still be able to access TAFE after year 12 and move on to university. So regardless of those choices in year 11 and 12, it's important to realise that while you may feel like those choices were made for a particular reason, unless the subject is a prerequisite, you're not locking yourself into a particular direction with many of the choices that you make. So it may sometimes really be advisable to complete a subject, or if you can, look into the possibility of changing it, but keep in mind that you are still doing a very general course, and while VCE contains prerequisites, it is really setting you up for further study in whatever direction you choose.
Awesome, thank you.
And sorry, I was going to make one other point too there, that those pathways we've been talking about might require extra time and work, but please don't be put off by this, because you should definitely not be thinking that your choices in high school are going to define you for the rest of your life. That's definitely not the case.
Perfect, thanks Phil. So now we're going to open up to Q&A from the audience. So as I mentioned at the start, if you would like to ask any questions, please use the Q&A function to pop those questions in. So I have a question here from Nathan, who asks, and this is probably one for you, Phil, if I pick specialist, do I have to do maths methods as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't say that it's compulsory to choose methods, but it is extremely advisable to choose methods to go with specialists. And that's probably the simplest and best answer I can give with that. And from that point, I would say you need to be talking to your maths teacher and your careers advisor at your school.
Yep, great answer. So Mark wants to know, do I understand there is 4 core subjects studied through VCAL with no electives or other selections, as well as the 4 core subjects that they will undertake a vet study?
Yes, so generally yes, but you may need to check with your school, because some schools will make some, or have their own style of VCAL, if you like. They may choose to include another subject that might be from the VCE, so it might be perhaps a modified subject that does not have exams. So there are variations on that, but essentially it's the core component, and usually there's not choice in that. The choice comes around the vet subject. Hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Phil. So I've got a question here from Emily. Do universities offer any practical subjects? We certainly do, and I know you can probably add to this as well, being a dual sector university. It depends very much on the course that you choose to study, but there are definitely practical units, whether it be music or you might be doing laboratories as part of a science degree or things like that. I don't know if you want to chip in on that one as well.
Yeah, so Jackie did mention I'm from a dual sector university, which essentially means we offer both vocational, so TAFE, and higher education, which is your bachelor degree programs. And like Jackie mentioned earlier in the presentation, if you're looking at more those more vocational type studies, they're going to be very hands-on and practical. However, that doesn't mean a bachelor degree doesn't have any of those practical classes as well. If you're looking at things such as engineering, that's going to have a lot of practical stuff. Even law, you're going to have to practice debating in front of everyone. And again, you're going to be in labs and whatnot, using a lot of different type of technologies, and even just putting a lot of data in computer. So yeah, there's a lot of practical classes, no matter if you're going into vocational or higher education.
Great answer. So I have a question here. I'm not sure if you might be able to answer this, Phil. Do you know how the study scores for subjects are calculated?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. It's probably not one that we can necessarily answer here, but essentially the study scores are based on a combination of exam work and the coursework that you might do within your school. So in combining those, the VCAA, which is the authority overseeing that process, will come up with essentially a mark for each student in that subject. And that's then converted into a study score. The study score is actually the ranking of all those marks, and the ranking of 30 is the mean for that particular subject.
Perfect. So I have another question from Emily here. If you decide to go to a VCAL school and decide that you don't want to do the VCAL course anymore, are there options to get into university? So that's a great question, Emily. I think from a university point of view, there's definitely that pathway option. So if you completed your VCAL course, you could then go into a TAFE or a certificate diploma sort of course and use that then as a pathway through into university. Phil, I don't know if you want to add anything from your side to that question.
No, that's a great answer, Jackie. And I suppose I would just add that we've had, we have probably a student each year in Year 12 on average who would make that decision to change their mind. And there are usually 2 or 3, I would suggest, who would choose a TAFE pathway without necessarily thinking that they want to go to university, but we will essentially advise them that you can use that to go on to do further study.
I might jump in on that one. So it depends on when you're going to exit VCAL, if that's what you decide. It's going to be based on your age. And also, if you are exiting Year 11 without completing Year 11 or Year 12, the TAFE university may ask you to sit an additional requirement, such as a language, literacy, and numeracy test. And the reason we do this is to just make sure that you're capable of completing that certificate level course. However, if you do complete VCAL, for example, and you finish Year 12 VCAL, you will be eligible for diploma level courses. So it does depend on your age and at what point you exit Year 11 or Year 12.
All right, so the next question we have, are there any resources available outside of schools for Year 10 students with regard to subject selection if they're unclear about their career options after Year 12? I guess that's a fairly broad question. I guess I would suggest talking to your careers teachers at school and making use of all of those 3 Ps I talked about earlier is going to help students with making those career decisions. Talking to people in industry, talking to friends and family, making use of all of those publications, websites, and industry events, institution events, and things like that. Phil, and I don't know if you want to add to that as well.
Yeah, I think that's right, Jackie. There is a lot of resources out there, and probably too much for us to really talk about here. So yeah, contact your school. So there are quite a number of what we might call sort of one-stop shops where you can really just dive in and explore all sorts of different types of questions that you might have going forward. And the VTAC website, which has been mentioned tonight, is a good resource in itself, but I would definitely say contact your school and get some further help on that too.
All right, so I have a question here. If you don't know anything about biology and chemistry, which one would be better to choose for year 11? Do you have any advice around that, Phil?
I guess the advice on that is to try and change that situation so that you feel better informed about that subject. And the best way to be doing that is to be talking to teachers. So yes, there is information on the VCAA website about the VCE subjects. I find that it's really better to have a face-to-face conversation with the teacher if you can. And perhaps talk with your science teacher about what you've actually done in the past, or maybe a teacher you've had in past years, so that you can find out more about them that way, because what your experience in a subject is very often the best way to make that choice.
Great. So Karen has asked if there are any core subjects for the VCE, and I would assume that English is obviously one of those. Is there anything else to add to that, Phil?
No. So the core requirement is that the students must do a Year 12, Unit 3 and Unit 4 sequence of English, so the same subject. And there are a couple of choices around the English that the students choose. So usually the student will choose English, but there are options in English language and in literature. And for students doing a language, who do a language other than English, or speaking a language other than English, who are eligible, then there's the EAL program for them. And that's determined by the school. So that's the only core subject.
Fantastic. So I have a question here from Rayanne. My son is interested in pursuing a plumbing trade. And in your experience, Phil, as a career advisor, is it best to finish VCAL or start an apprenticeship after year 10?
Yeah, that's a very individual decision. But what I would say is that you need to be really clear about that. And I've got to be careful in giving that sort of advice. You need to be clear that the apprenticeship is right for the individual. So we could never make a broad judgment on whether it's the right thing to do or not. Some students do it, and some students are successful and some not so much. So it is very much an individual decision, and you need to work with all of the people involved in making that decision. So the school, the student, the parent and the employer need to be involved in that decision, because I understand that perhaps there might be some concern or pressure to finish year 12, because that's usually what we advise, but we're not saying it's always going to be the right decision, and it's going to be up to the individual.
To that one as well, from coming from a TAFE background. There are things such as a school-based apprenticeship. Again, this is something where you have to have a conversation with your school. And I would also encourage you to approach the tertiary provider if you're interested in picking up an apprenticeship. In some cases, they will require you to already have an employer, but some TAFEs may be able to find one for you, or have you start your apprenticeship on campus before you actually work out in industry. So it is such an open-ended question, and Phil did a really good point in explaining that it does depend on the individual, because it's going to be highly dependable on the institute as well and the way they frame that apprenticeship for students. But just keep in mind, everyone will always have the student's best interests in heart.
Right. So I have another question here from Kevin about going to university and looking at a Bachelor of Science degree. What are the minimum subjects? I guess given this is more about subject selection, this particular webinar, I would recommend that you have a chat with the individual institutions that you're looking to study with about what those requirements are for the individual course. We're just talking about the courses that you should select in order to be able to pursue that tertiary qualification. So yeah, make sure you have a bit of a chat to those individual institutions around that one. Helena is asked, units 3 and 4, the scores part of your ATAR. Phil, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's right. So unit 1 and 2 subjects do not contribute to the ATAR. It's only unit 3 and 4.
Perfect. My son enjoys legal studies as an elective in year 10. what options should he go for? What sort of career options in this area? Do you want to start on that one, Phil?
Yeah, so I think legal studies is a good example, I think, of what I was talking about before, where certainly it's a great thing to follow if you're interested in. It may take a person in that direction, in the direction of pursuing law, or perhaps studying some law subjects at university, but it doesn't necessarily have to do that. And so it fits under that sort of broad area of study where you are really engaging with more academic material, being able to write well, being able to understand some fairly complex material. So it gives you a very broad range of skills. So really it does set you up to do a much broader range of options than simply following the direction of law. For example, students might study commerce, but then in that they'll find themselves doing some law subjects. Science students will find themselves in a similar sort of position. So that's the beauty of the VCE, is that in doing a subject you enjoy, it still prepares you for a range of other subjects, and that's why you should not feel like the course needs to be filled up with things that are all career orientated.
So good advice. One last question I have, and if there's any more people out there would like to ask anything, if you pop your questions in now. For computing and IT, what subjects are best to choose in year 11 and 12?
Yeah, a good question. So there is a bit of variation around what students do when they do IT. Some students will choose IT at high school because they like the IT that's on offer, and schools are different in what you can access. So the IT subjects, and I'm not that familiar with the specifics of the content, but I know that not every student wants to do all of what's in those courses. So make sure that you understand the IT that's on offer at your school, and make sure it's something you're going to enjoy. And if you definitely want to be doing IT or computer science in the future, then certainly be looking at that very closely. What I'd probably recommend that goes with that is an appropriate level of maths. So it comes back to just choosing the highest level of maths possible, so that if you're really interested in a broad range of different computer science and IT options, then you have as many of those as possible open to you. So really the maths and the IT themselves go hand in hand, and a lot of students get to the end of year 12 and want to do computer science, but they've not actually studied IT. That's not going to prevent them from taking that pathway because they've got those important skills to go with it.
Great. I have one more question that's come through. What subjects do you suggest that will raise the possibility of getting into law courses at universities? I can, I guess, talk to you about with regard to the law course that we offer at Monash. Because the prerequisites only English, there's no other requirements with regard to other subjects that would raise your chances. But I guess what we've recommended all along here is to choose subjects that you enjoy and that you're good at, because the more subjects in that, in the fields that you enjoy and are good at, the more likely you are to do better in those areas, which is obviously hopefully going to give you a better result at the end of the year. Phil, I don't know if you want to add to that as well.
Yeah, the same from a Swinburne perspective. The only prerequisite is the English requirement and to obtain a particular ATAR score. However, maybe legal studies would be a great subject to look at because that does touch on some of those intro type units at a university level.
Yeah, I'd say probably if you're interested in a humanities subject, that will be complementary as well. But again, as Jackie said, is choosing what you're going to enjoy and be good at, because apart from that English prerequisite, you're looking at getting the best score you possibly can.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
We have no more questions at this stage. I'll just leave it open for 30 seconds or so in case there's any last minute questions out there. But I would really like to say thank you to everybody who's attended today. We've had a really great turnout for our first TIS webinar. And thank you very much to Phil for joining us today. to Anna as well for helping me run this event, and to Jenna, Daniel and Jared in the background for helping out with some Q&A and logistics in the background there. So it looks like we don't have any more questions coming through, so we might leave things there. Thanks again to everybody, and if you do have any more questions or concerns, you can have a look on the TIS Facebook page. We do also have the TIS YouTube channel, and obviously keep in touch with all of the individual institutions and your schools as well. Thank you very much for joining us. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.